Can anyone hear me? There we go. Hello. My name is Joe Steele, and I'll be joined by a colleague Chris a little bit later on, and we're going to be talking about essentially 2002 at Railsr. So I've been in IT for almost 20 years now, which is scary to say. That's coming up to half my life. I've worked across multiple verticals, and I'm currently the global head of workplace technology and InfoSec at Railsr. You, however, may best know me as the guy who bought every single MacBook about a week before the first COVID lockdown. And once again, I'm sorry for doing so, because there weren't any available for probably 2 months after that, so my apologies. So Railsr are an embedded finance fintech. We do all sorts of integrated cards and banking services, and we have a really good developer API, which you can check out at the bottom. I'm getting a bunch of feedback, by the way. Are those mics on? Cool. So yeah, check out our API and see how you can integrate our products into your offerings. So speaking of COVID, let's go back to a pre-COVID world. Everything was a little bit different. People were predominantly office-based. There was a lot of on-prem resources still out there in the world. We had network-based security. A lot of IT support face-to-face, lots of hands-on devices, et cetera, not much SaaS usage back then, although it was beginning to expand. And fast forward to today, and things have changed a lot. Probably the most change in the IT landscape, possibly ever, within these sort of 2-3 years. So the people are now working hybrid, or some people are back to full office work. There's a lot more people working remote. I personally, I'm 1 day a week in the office. Basically, everything's moved to cloud because it had to, because during lockdowns and whatnot, no one was able to go into the office to use those on-prem resources. The endpoints are now secure as opposed to the networks. We've got a lot more remote and IM-based IT support, and a lot of sort of hands-off kind of automation. And then obviously that SaaS usage has increased to counteract the sort of diminishing use of on-prem. So let's take me to the start of January 2022 at Railsr. This is when I joined the business. I'm going to kind of split things into what I see as the key resources for an IT team or business, which are the people. So in terms of people, we had 450 at the business, 9 dedicated IT support, and we were in 6 offices around the world. The technology, so 430 Mac OS devices, all managed by Jamf Pro, which was sort of self-managed instance, and we had a few Windows devices. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say Windows here. Time-wise, we're a 24/7 business. So, everything was constant. There was no time to sort of rest. And money-wise, so we'd had some successful funding rounds as a business. So money was okay, but we had some problems. We had a huge support team, so the support to staff ratio was just completely off in my eyes. So the team was growing disproportionately to the rest of the business because we had so many kind of issues, and we were throwing people at the problem. But that doesn't really work when they don't have the tools they need or the time they need, and then that creates even more issues where the team just, people are leaving the team. There's high churn in the team because they don't feel like they can achieve what they want to achieve, and then the powers that be, C-suite and whatnot, don't want to invest because they're not really getting much out of the team in the first place. The technology, we had no IAM, so we had multiple sort of sources of truth in terms of user directory. So we've got Google Workspace, we've got users in there, we've got Slack, a slightly different array of users in there. We've got hundreds of SaaS apps, and really difficult to keep control of who has access to what, and making sure that we sort of remain compliant in terms of ISO and everything else. In terms of time, so JML process, and on and offboarding staff, so laptops and user account provisioning, etc. There's 25 work days a year. Bear in mind, we're not the biggest company in the world, and we're not onboarding huge amounts of people. That's a lot of time taken to do so. Access requests, even worse, taking over 100 work days a year. Crazy, because we don't have any automations around provisioning access. Missing SLAs all over the place because it's taking too much time to do all of these kind of aforementioned tasks. And because that's taking so much time, we don't have any time to improve things, which we desperately need to do. And in terms of money, SaaS spend was probably double what I thought it should be, and that was sort of a hangover from COVID, right? Everyone gets rushed to remote work, and suddenly they want access to everything, and costs a lot of money these days in terms of licensing for SaaS spend. Large support team, and then we're spending a bunch of money on recruitment. So I came up with project fundamentals. The first thing I wanted to do was make sure that we could answer the fundamental questions, in my mind, that you need to be able to answer to run a sort of functioning team, right? And this is what they are. So all sounds pretty simple, but when you dig into it, you think, okay, I can't actually answer any of these questions. Who are my users? Well, kind of tricky when, like I say, we've got so many different sources of truth, having to manually go in and offboard people, et cetera, fine, quite difficult. And then in turn, that makes access and granting and removing access even more difficult. We're not automating anything, like I said. We don't really know if we're compliant. We're putting huge amounts of time into trying to manage everything else. The compliance sort of falls away a little bit. Our assets, again, is a bit of a mess because we're low on time and maybe we're making mistakes here and there. And then because of that time issue again, support experience is pretty poor. But before I can do anything about answering those questions, we need some of the aforementioned resources, right? I started with money. How can I make or free up some cash to be able to enable some of these things to happen? And I found a very interesting statistic where 30% of SaaS licenses are underutilized or unused completely. I thought, right, okay, I'm going to spend my first month just digging through SaaS licensing and getting rid of as many licenses as I possibly can. And I managed to save, I'm cut off, interesting, 150K a year recurring costs in SaaS by just literally sitting there manually going through all of these tools and just getting rid of licenses. It took me a month. It was hundreds and hundreds of different licenses, but it all really added up. And yeah, cool. So now I've got some money. Awesome. Now we need some time. Well, let's buy some time, shall we? Easiest way to buy time, in my eyes, is get someone else to do what you need to be doing, right? So we outsourced our Jamf to Datajar.mobi. For those of you who don't know, it's a kind of fully managed Jamf Pro platform. And it's kind of a really good, almost out-of-the-box experience where you get things like zero touch, device onboarding, self-service app store, all that kind of good stuff. And I mean, some of our engineers were spending sort of tens of hours a week making sure our Jamf was up to date, that our OSs were up to date, that our software was up to date, et cetera, et cetera. All that time can now be spent elsewhere, freeing up some time. We did the same thing, Datajar Defend. So to ensure that compliance I mentioned, cool, we don't have to worry about it anymore. To yeah, helped with our kind of ISO, and yeah, just gets rid of a lot of stress, right? And then on top of that, we got Okta in. For any of you, again, don't know, Okta is kind of IAM solution that has all kinds of cool automations built in. We'll go through them a little bit later on. But yeah, that was really to target the kind of identity and access issue that we had. However, we still got to implement these things, and that takes time in itself. And it also takes the right people to do so. So had an issue where everyone in the team was essentially doing support because they sort of had to be, right? So no one could focus on doing actual sort of things that were going to bring us forward, were going to buy us more time and get us to where we wanted to be. So we split the team into support and an engineering function, essentially, because we wanted to really focus on automations, and to focus on automations, you need engineers, right? You need people with developer skills. So now I've got my money, I can hire someone with developer skills. So let me welcome Mr. Chris Yo to the stage, who became that very developer.
Thank you. Yep, there I am. Thanks for that lovely introduction, Joe, and for telling everyone what my yearly salary is, that £150,000 well spent, I think. So yeah, I've worked with Joe for about 3 or 4 years now across a couple of fintech gigs. Was in higher ed before that. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of take you through my last year at Railsr, because I joined just about a year ago. So Joe's already mentioned .mobi. This isn't a sponsored bit, I promise you. It's just that it's kind of one of the biggest projects we've done at the company, along with Okta. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on all of the code and the automations that we've put in to kind of tie these things together. Because in isolation, tools like these, you can buy them, and then there's this false dichotomy between build or buy. You have to do both, in my eyes anyway. So datajar.mobi, as Joe said, sometimes the simplest automation you can do is just to get somebody else to do it for you. And so long as they're doing it well, it can often be a big win. We get access to arguably some of the best Mac engineers and admins in the UK. All of our apps are packaged, up and patched, and the OS is patched. And even though this all sounds very positive, I wasn't that keen on the idea at first, because I'd been a Mac admin for over 13 years. I kind of didn't want to give up that bit of my career, really. But it was good that I did, because I was able to do a bunch of the other stuff that we're going to talk about today. This just freed up so much time for me that I can actually focus on other things that are valuable to the business. So before we could get our machines into .mobi, we had to do a self-service-based MDM migration from our existing Jamf tenant. The idea here again, get other people to do it for you. So we got our users to do this themselves, and that involved building a UI. It involved it being adminless. I use this as standard. We weren't going to do any sort of permissions elevation. Yeah, and we had other automations in place as part of this, which I'm going to go into. But we were doing things like cleaning up the old records of machines as they were coming into the new MDM. And we chose to erase our devices as part of this so that we have a fresh start, because the old Jamf environment is worlds apart from the new Jamf environment that we were going into with .mobi. And as Joe's mentioned, user lifecycle management. The people we're getting to do this for us are HR, right, as far as possible. They tend to know best who's coming and going and when. And we've driven a lot of our sort of event streams off of this. People leaving, people coming back, people joining anew, everything from reclaiming licenses, saving thousands of pounds, automatically turning off accounts in our SaaS applications, and even down to locking their devices within like seconds of them being offboarded. So really high hit rate there as well. Yeah, and this whole slide really, and everything on it, we get to sleep a lot better at night. So that's pretty nice. So I'm going to focus in on MDM migration. How many people have done an MDM migration here or have one coming up? Yeah? It can be pretty scary, but it managed to go pretty well for us. We did over 300 devices across a global workforce. So that's the US, UK, Lithuania, multiple parts of Asia. And we tied it all together with a bunch of these tools. So we had Slack for our communications campaign. We used IBM Notifier for the UX on device. Obviously, we've got our previous Jamf instance for self-service, .mobi, Okta's involved, and we had a schedule, a plan, and a deadline, and we made sure that we stuck to it as far as possible. So let's dig into the methodology on that then. As I've said, wipe the devices. Maybe that isn't something that you might agree with, but for us it made sense. This wouldn't have really been possible before Monterey. Erase all contents and settings. Thank the Lord that this now exists on macOS. Amazing piece of tech, get the machine back to fresh state within 5 minutes, generally. And then you can rely on automated device enrollment, right? So that you can avoid that gap, that scary no man's land when you go from and enroll from one MDM, and then, is that device ever going to be seen again? This way, the device can't be used until it's gone back through an enrollment flow because you're erasing it. So this is probably more important in a way than anything else. Giving people plenty of time and then spamming the heck out of them. We automated this as well, and it's like super efficient when you use a bot to do this. And the way that we triggered these messages was to take webhooks from our previous Jamf instance. So when people's devices were checking in, we were sort of like building up a queue, and then we'd hit a threshold, we'd push a message through to them on Slack, and the closer we got to that deadline date, the lower and lower that threshold got, to the point where we were hitting people every 20 minutes on like the last couple of days. So that's kind of like a carroty stick, what I've described there. A bit more of a carrot is maybe start making services available only on your shiny new platform, right? So one thing we did was biometric passwordless sign-in with Okta, and we told everyone about it, and then people going, it's not working for me. It's like, well, you're not on .mobi yet, are you? So that's one tactic you can take, and you can turn the same sort of tools like Okta Device Trust and use that to get a bit more hardline then as you start getting more serious, maybe restricting access to some or all of your SaaS applications, and eventually just lock the machine so that people can't work, and HR issue, right? But that said, don't get fired is the other tip I would give you. Not everyone's going to sort of, well, the really powerful people at the company are often the ones that don't comply, right? They're very busy, and maybe they feel like this doesn't include them, but it does. But have a way to kind of usher them in gently, and always have a way out and a back door for this. Don't get yourself into trouble. So as I said, the interesting bit about this is the device erasure. So let's peer in on this a little bit more. It's kicked off in self-service. Nice, pretty UX, ways for the user to back out, right? And progress bars and all that kind of stuff. And our script calls the Jamf API and does an erase device command, and then erase all content and settings, right? This looks good. Wrong. What's wrong with this slide? There's something stinky going on. Come on, someone tell me what's wrong. No? First line of the script. Putting Jamf API credentials in scripts. Super bad, okay? I'm sure nobody here does it, but don't do this ever. In this particular case, if someone sniffed that secret out, they could go and arbitrarily wipe a bunch of Macs in your Jamf instance, right? Just maybe iterate through that ID number. They'll have a lot of fun at your expense. So this idea, though, is solid, right? The idea that someone can click a button in self-service, and we're using the MDM framework to loop back and take actions. So the idea of what I'm calling, say, commands on demand, right? How do we do it safely? i.e. where clients can only affect themselves and without ever exposing API credentials for the Jamf API on to the client itself. Like, how do we do this? How do we Jamf responsibly, right? So I'm going to walk you through our methodology, how we did that. So simple setup, client enrolled into Jamf, it's got self-service, it's got the Jamf binary, And then the orange circle there, that's going to represent our broker, our little service that's going to help us with a little bit of indirection here to make this work. So we run our script in self-service, users see in the UI, and what our client's going to do is going to reach up to our broker and say, hey, give me a random code. The broker's going to store that code against the UDID, and it's going to set, like I say, a 2 or 3 minute timeout on it, so it'll expire if it's not used within that window. The device writes that code to disk in a temporary file, whose location is well known, and it does a Jamf recon. So we've got an extension attribute in Jamf that's looking at the temp file location for this code, and all that means essentially is that code now gets written into that device's record in Jamf under that extension attribute. So if any of you have used Let's Encrypt and understand how that works, this is sort of taking inspiration from that. I'll explain that in a moment. But the idea here is that if a device can Jamf recon successfully in the first place, that means it's got certificate-based trust already with Jamf, right? We trust it. This device is cool. It can talk to Jamf. But secondly, a device can only update its own device record in this way. So it's attesting that it can, and proving that it has authority over this particular record in Jamf. So once the device has done that, it then comes back and posts again to our service, this time saying, hey, I've done the thing, go and check. And we go off, we pull the computer record down, we make sure it all matches up, that this was done within that expiry window, so this has to be done pretty quickly by the client. And assuming we're happy with that, we're going to then, on the client's behalf, post to Jamf that erase device command, and then we're back to where we want it to be, but with a little bit of indirection and thought, we've managed to avoid putting those credentials on disk, and we've set up a flow in a way that the client can only ever affect itself. Okay? Now, this works with a Raise device, but I think a really interesting use case for this would be software update, right? Maybe install ASAP, download and install, force restart, put a button in self-service. In fact, this is such a compelling idea that really it's already been asked a bunch of times. I think there are a few sort of Jamf idea sort of articles open for this. Unfortunately, the answer is usually not likely to be implemented. Well, I'm happy to tell you today that there is a tool called Command on Demand. I have just opened up the GitHub repo. I'm happy to announce it here at MacAd. Please go and check it out. This is basically that little broker service that I just showed you. I'm not an expert Go developer. It is written in Go. If you are, please come and help out. Tell me where I've gone horribly wrong. But this does work. Yeah, and come and chat to me about it later if you'd like. And I'm going to hand over to Joe. But as a little spoiler, he's agreed to sacrifice himself to the demo gods and show this off a little bit later, right at the end of his talk. So over to Joe. Thank you very much.
Good job. Cool. That right there is why you hire developers in your IT team. So let's fast forward a year. Sort of running pretty long time here, so we're going to fly through this stuff. So now we've got all our shiny new toys in place. We've saved a whole bunch of time. We've got a nice kind of fully integrated tech stack, right? So we've got our HR system mastering all of our identity, which is then mastering Okta, which is then creating access for all of our fancy new toys. We've implemented, I haven't mentioned yet, RefTab, which is asset management. So .mobi is in fact updating RefTab automatically. So a little API integration means that all the devices end up in our asset management automatically, which is cool. And Okta is assigning the users to those devices as well. So that's a nice little workflow. So zero input from our side. And yeah, it's great, and it gives us the options of building all kinds of cool workflows, such as our zero-touch user onboarding. So, like I said, it's kind of driven by our HR system, Bamboo HR. So we do nothing, essentially, throughout this process. The people team create a user. All of that user's information is there. It's accessible to us. It's also accessible to our automation tools. So our automation tools pick up some jobs. They send line managers notifications. They then integrate the user into Okta. So the Okta user has all the relevant details, and using those details gets assigned to various groups. So for example, if you're in the workplace technology team, you end up in the workplace technology group and you get assigned the apps relevant to that team, which is great. And then, yeah, like I say, so downstream apps, all of the downstream apps, all of this gets done for us, again, sort of based on those groups. And then even our suppliers get notified saying, hey, we've got a new user, here's their address, get them a laptop relevant to kind of who they are. Then we've got a few days before people start, we've got more sort of Slack notifications, we've got calendar entries created, we've got all sorts of good stuff. We've got final reminders kind of the day before. And yeah, this is, on the final day, sorry, user gets activated automatically based on their start date within the HR system. And they can now use single sign-on to sign into 100 plus SaaS apps and do all kinds of other good stuff, which is awesome. So if you were to assign even, say, 5 minutes to all of these tasks, right, that's 4 hours, 15 minutes per user worth of tasks that we're now doing just, completely hands off, right? Saving us huge, huge amount of time. So I go back to project fundamentals, right? Having done all this stuff, can we answer these questions? Well, yeah, we kind of can. We know who our staff are now because our HR system is kind of driving it, who our users are. Okta's managing access. We've got all our lovely automations. We've got compliance from .mobi. We've got our assets are all automatically updated. And our support team are much happier because they got access to all these tools and automations, and we've reduced, these ticket numbers by huge amounts. So let's look at some more kind of outcomes based on those resources. So, like I said, technology-wise, there's all kinds of good stuff. Single source of truth for everything. We've got zero touch, user and device onboarding. So you don't really have to do anything to onboard people. Same with offboarding as well. It's essentially the opposite of what I showed you, again, with all sorts of notifications and whatnot. Even lock devices on the day of offboarding automatically through Jamf. We've got automations across the board. Just everyone, is sort of using an automation, whether they know it or not, throughout their day. We've got compliant devices. We've got passwordless kind of single sign-on, as Chris mentioned. Then in terms of time saving, well, I've mentioned a lot of time saving, but it's a pretty big number on there. So 350 full work days a year saved just through the automations we put in place. Obviously tricky to calculate, but that is a conservative estimate. And yeah, access requests down by over 60% because, again, it's being driven by these automations and self-service. The workplace tech team, no longer just constantly firefighting. They have time to learn and develop and actually do what they want to be doing. We have a workplace tech engineering team, and they have the time to do impactful work, as you saw. And the people, we've completely changed that ratio. So 1 to 110 now in terms of staff, workplace tech support to staff at the business. They're happier, they're empowered as a team, they can feel able to solve these issues. We've got reduced friction for our end users to get to that support, so a happier organization in general, better technology experience, and yeah, all good stuff. And then in terms of money, some big numbers again. So eventually, we managed to save about 300K recurring costs a year just in SaaS licensing from things like Okta and some other automations that we put together, and all of that painstaking manual work I put in. Then we've got things like the workplace tech engineering staff that we just sort of no longer require because we've outsourced it. We've got money saved from contractors who were doing all sorts of just manual work for us. And yeah, overall, we're operating at about $250,000 less a year than we were expected to be doing. So even with the new technology and the increased size of the business. So I think sort of final message from me is there's a difference between sort of uninvested, in every sense of the word. An invested IT team for us was hundreds of thousands of pounds and thousands of hours of wasted, sort of saved time across the business. Extrapolate that out to larger organizations and you're in the tens of thousands and the millions perhaps, so worth thinking about. And that is it from me. Have we got time to do, yeah? Okay, cool.
Any questions?
I'm not getting out of it. Okay, so Chris has built something and not shown me, and apparently I have to press a button, and I'm a little bit scared. And it's not displaying on the screen.
Let me switch it around.
Okay.
Yeah, let me see if I can.
Developer and IT support. You are the full
There
package.
it is, right, okay. Right, so it's just a little contrived example of what we did, right, with our users. Obviously, we weren't quite as mean as this, but we did give them like sort of lots of chances to sort of back out, as I said earlier. This is IBM Notifier. This is great for building these kind of little experiences. So I want to do this. I think you meant to be doing this.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll do it.
So does the audience want Joe to do this?
You've got to
Yes,
wipe the device.
right.
All right, why not?
And you have nothing left to lose, is what the
I
last
got
one
nothing left to lose. Okay.
said. And you're saying hurt me plenty? Is that your choice?
Yeah, why not?
All right, cool.
Is this going to work?
Well, let's find out.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, let me move this.
Move it over to the right.
Where is my cursor?
Right. So now we bring up this message. So at this point, that flow I showed you is going on, right? The machine is doing this code proof with Jamf, and our service is checking it out. If that timer gets down to 0, then we're toast. But if this machine gets erased in the next couple of seconds, then we're good. This is very tense, isn't it?
Oh.
There we go. Live demo. Can't use that
That's one
machine
way
anymore.
to end the talk.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
I've never seen that before. Way to end your session is to wipe your device.
Wiped.
Any questions? Would be the other
yeah.
side of the room, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, where was the...
Hold on, mate.
Oh, we have a lot of questions. Cool.
Nothing in the app.
Great session, guys. You've talked a lot about cost savings there. I just sort of wondered how long is it taken or going to take you to realise those cost savings based on the cost it's been to implement those new solutions?
Yeah, so tricky one. It's sort of a sliding scale, right? So if you look at the SaaS side of things, obviously if you're on a sort of month-to-month contract, then you can realize those savings immediately. So I focused on those kind of month-to-month contracts, getting rid of licenses there, things like Atlassian and productivity tools, your Mondays and whatever else. So I focused on where we could get an immediate saving, which is why I very quickly got that 150K out the window, which was great. And then sort of told C-suite, and they were like, oh, awesome, you should reinvest that. And I was like, cool. Obviously more difficult to kind of work out longer term, but we sort of just did it based on, okay, what costs have we removed, and what would that look like next year in terms of the budget? So in terms of realization, it sort of trickled through based on when contract renewals came in, contractors, contract lengths and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, within the year, we've really started to notice, let's put it that way. Cheers.
Hey, so I got kind of two. The first one is how, like movers, if someone changes role in the HR system, does that flow through the exact same process, or is it a completely different one for that, like in terms of removing their access and then putting it back? Yeah,
so like I said, the groups are what's in Okta are what's sort of driving access to everything, and the groups. Oh, we've got to restart. The groups are based on the automatically populated based on information in the HR system. So like I said, if you were in the workplace tech team and, I don't know, you moved to marketing, right? You would drop out of the workplace tech group, you'd enter the marketing group, and you'd lose any assignments you had and gain those marketing assignments. Why you'd want to change from that team to the other, I don't know. But it's all, the whole movers process is, again, fully automated.
Any more?
Any more questions?
We have a working, Mac. Great.
Just trying to get past the jump scare.
Yeah, so great session.
Thanks, man.
Question around the carrot and the stick
Yeah.
part. Because obviously, wiping your users' devices is a tad disruptive to them.
Yeah.
So apart from the carrot of remaining employed, what other carrots did you offer them?
What other carrots did we offer?
Yeah.
Well, we did. We only put Okta Verify on the .mobi machines. And then, as I said, we very publicly showed people this cool stuff, but without telling them it was exclusive first. And we waited for people to realize that they couldn't do it. And that, oh yeah, the Slack bot has been nagging me for 2 weeks. And the other carrot as well, I think, is just the ease of the process, right? With the UX coming from self-service. And we did a bunch of documentation and videos and stuff as well. It was like quite a big effort. The other carrot and stick as well is having the exec behind you on it, obviously. It's kind of a stick, but at the same time, if people can see that they believe in it and think that it's a good idea, then people will probably also play along. So, yeah. It's not going to show there, is it? But just show you. MDM Managed Mac. It'll get there in a minute. But, yeah, there we go. That's the idea. So gapless management, right?
Cool. Unless there's any questions from anyone else, feel free to catch up with us. Oh, question down here.
I just wanted to know, do you take into consideration using any Okta workflows?
Yeah, well, there are Okta workflows in there.
Yeah.
The question was, did we take into consideration using Okta workflows? Yeah, as part of all sorts of processes, there's Okta workflows.
We've been playing, there's quite a journey, and there's loads of these products springing up. Okta Workflows is great for when you want to do like event-driven stuff in Okta. But I find once the workflows start getting numerous, well, you run out of workflows, so that gets expensive. But also, like, dragging around these boxes, for me, that solution didn't always make sense. So we've used another one called Pipedream. And that's why I wrote the tool that I've shared today, was because it's not always easy to share those solutions. And actually, when you get to a certain scale with these automation platforms, if you've got an engineering team, it makes sense to maybe just rebuild it yourself, because then you can get a load of other benefits. But yeah, we do use Okta Workflows, so right tool for the job.
Yeah, I mean, it's generally prototyping stage, I would say,
Yeah,
Okta Workflow. So if we're like, okay, can we actually do this thing?
Yeah.
Then we work out on Okta Workflows and then maybe migrate it to our own kind of platform afterwards. But yeah, it's a really good tool to have.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you've got any more questions, come and find us. We'll be around for, well, me for today. You're here the whole time. And yeah, thanks again.